Goran Vojnović, it's wonderful to see you again. I can see where you are. I can reach out. I can almost touch you, but not quite. Where are you? And then I'll tell you where I am.
Well, I'm at Beletrina bookshop in Ljubljana. This is our improvised studio during the pandemic. So we've been here talking to audiences all around the world. So it's actually a way for me to travel around the world in this crazy time. So yesterday I was in Skopje in Macedonia. Today I'm in London. So
it's interesting. Well, that's great. Well, you're not actually in London. You're with me in Wiltshire. I've been sort of in lockdown and during the pandemic in Wiltshire, so in the countryside. It's been really, really lovely. So I'm about 2 hours away from London, but if you want to, we can be in London. we can teleport ourselves anywhere. But anyway, it's really, really wonderful to see you. And a year ago, just over a year ago, you and I were in Norwich together. That was the last time we met at the British Centre for Literary Translation. And you were working with the summer school there with your translator, Olivie Hellewell, and you were actually working on this book. I remember it extremely well. I was working with the Italian translators and you were working with the Slovene translators. Isn't it a miracle? And here's the book, you know, The Fig Tree. It's an absolutely amazing story. It's very, very different from your other novels. This is your third novel. And now you tell me about this one, because you wrote this, it was published in 2016 in Slovene. And here we are just publishing it this month in October 2020 in English.
Yes, it's been a long way, actually. It's been a long way for me to write that book. It took me, I think, 4 years, and 2 of those 4 years were very intensive. And it was a whole different experience. As you said, it's very different from my previous 2 novels. So it was a completely different approach. As I said many times, I think my first 2 books were 2 streams. I was dealing with the topics that just had to come out of me. And sometimes I didn't have the control, that's if I look back. But then with this book I took a different approach, and I wanted a different type of book. I'm still dealing with the same topics, but I wanted to put them a little bit aside to focus on some other things as well. So yes, it's in a way quieter novel. It's dealing with many different things, and of course it's also very difficult to translate, I would say. So it was a long process, but the one, I think, especially Olivia, but also me, we enjoyed it. And I think the most enjoyable thing was this workshop in Norwich, when we translated together with some, let's say, students, I think 7 of them, and we translated 1 page in 1 week. And I could see that long process, and but it was a lot of fun. And you could see how a translator can rewrite your novel in so many different ways. And I think, well, of course, my English is not perfect, but when I'm reading now the translation, I think that Olivia has done a tremendous job.
Well, you're a very generous author as well. I mean, this is, so you have read the book in English now, have you?
Well, not all of it, I must admit.
It's quite a long book.
Yeah, yes, and I've read it a couple times in different languages before, so yeah, it's...
I would highly recommend it to everyone. As you can see, I've made lots of little notes and so on. And there is that wonderful passage which you translated, all of you together, which I think we should read later, because it is also about the main body of the story. The story is, as you say, it's very different from your other novels. The first novel I read, Yugoslavia, My Fatherland, which, as you know, I absolutely adored. That was more about the history, particularly about the history of Yugoslavia through the voice of Vladan. This novel, The Fig Tree, spans many generations and is more, in a way, it's more relatable to all of us in the sense because it is about family, primarily about families and the secrets of families. It's about homes and houses and the earth we live on and what it all means to us, what all those different things mean to us. And I think that this story is also it is, as you say, it's much quieter, but it's an incredibly beautifully written novel. It's very different from a language point of view from your other novels. There was so much more dialogue and in many ways more dialect, I imagine. I'm sure that that's been ironed out a little bit by the translation, but it's such a beautiful novel, Goran. It's so wonderfully written, and in some ways it doesn't feel like the same novel, same novelist even. How do you approach each new novel? Because you've written, you do many different things. You're a storyteller primarily, but you do film, you do TV, you write, and you write columns as well. And when you approach a novel, what are you trying to do specifically? Is it very different from everything else you do?
Well, yes, the novels are, as you said, I do a lot of different things. I write for newspapers, I'm a director, I do direct films, and I also write screenplays. But I would say that novels are what I do most passionately, what I think about the most, and what I really focus the most on. And there's one thing that I really like when I'm writing a novel, is that there's no hurry, there's no pressure, there's no deadline. It just takes its time. Every novel takes its time. I'm thinking about it and I'm playing with all different ideas in my head. And when I think that I have something that it's worth enough for me to sit down and write, then I sit down and write. Of course, sometimes I have to wait to finish other things I'm working on, but then I really sit down and then I write, and I'm writing as long as it takes. I'm searching for the voice. As you said, this language of this book is quite different from the language of my first two books, because the character is different. The character who is telling the story is different. He's much more mature.
And you're different too.
Of course.
That's what's so interesting. I always think that each novel must tell a different story about the actual writer as well. And you've just turned 40, I think.
Yes.
That's the joy of Wikipedia. Everybody knows everything about you. But no, I know that you've just turned 40 because I remember talking to you about it last year. And I think that that must be a really big moment for you as well. To look back, you were about 10 when the Yugoslav wars happened. And this has been your life. You've been documenting your life to a certain degree in these novels.
Yeah, because in a way, it's these 3 novels I wrote so far shows the path I've made, as not just as a writer but also as a person. I was actually a kid when I wrote my first novel, and you can see this energy in there. And of course, later I was full of emotions, still some emotions I did understand, some emotions I didn't understand when I wrote Yugoslavia, My Fatherland, where I really wanted to tackle the topics that really define me as a person, the war in Balkans, which left me with so many unanswered questions. And I was sort of in a hurry to just express everything I felt and what I was thinking about. And then, of course, after that, I was able to really calm down, and first time I approached something, I think as a writer actually. I said, okay, how I would want to write something. Okay, I have this story I need to tell, but okay, what to do with it? How to tell this story in a very literature way, not just letting something out of you. It was, I think it was done with much control, but still, of course, you never have complete control over what you write. You start something, but then of course you live with your characters, you live with your story, and it develops. And it just grows and you try to somehow to stick to your original plan, but then the novel goes its own way.
Called the magic of literature, I think. I mean, it is a magical process, I think, and you are a very literary writer, and it's wonderful to see that in this novel too. And it is interesting because I've always thought sometimes on the surface it looks quite simple, and your characters look as though they're just they're just sort of wandering along, but you can see the great technical skills behind it. They're very sophisticated novels too. They're really, really wonderful. And I think this one is interesting on so many levels. I mean, you've got the multi-dimensional stories. I mean, the multi-generational stories, which everybody loves. Those kinds of family stories. It's a real. Oh my goodness, that's so. So you've got Grandad Alexander, and then you've got the son, and you've got the daughter. You've got Jana and Alexander, 1950s. Starts in the 1950s, and then in Istria, and then you've got Vesni and Safetu, and then you've got Jadranu and Anji. And Jadranu is the 30-something-year-old who's basically telling the story, but the story is told from many different angles. I mean, it is, and it's all based specifically around this house, this area in Istria. And I think that's, again, it's a very Yugoslav story because this is which is your fate, your identity will be probably always telling the story in some way or other.
Well, yes, it's always about me and my memories, preoccupations, my emotions. It's actually, this world, of course, it's very fictional, but every aspect of these stories, every character has some roots in my own biography, in real people and events. The fig tree in the novel, it's set, of course, in Istria, but in different parts of Istria, in totally different part of Istria than the real fig tree on which I always think when somebody says the fig tree. Because there is a real fig tree for me, which is very important for me, and there is also a house which is very important for me, and the people who used to live there are of course very important to me, and it's coming from this real world. But then of course I just let it become something else.
So the fig tree in Istria does exist. I mean, your mother, I think, came from that part of the world. Is that right?
Yes, my mother is from Pula, and in front of that house where she lived, and when she was a young girl, and where my grandparents lived until they died, is a fig tree. And for me, whenever you say fig tree or the fig, I will think about that specific tree. And that's why I let this novel a title, The Fig Tree, or actually it's the fig in Slovenian, which is both the fig and the fig tree. Because I think in this image in my head is where it's all began. I wanted to write about this world of mine and about the feelings I have about and everything. And of course, it's
I'm just trying to find the passage where you mentioned the fig tree, because it's great. You use it as a metaphor. It's a real tree, but it's also a wonderful metaphor as well. And it comes, at certain places during the novel. and the figs are in different, they're fresh or they're in decay. I mean, it's a wonderful use of those wonderful fruits that we all love. But you could say it's actually when Jadran, the very beginning of the novel is when his granddad, when Aleksandru has just died, or quite near the beginning, and he says, before my mind could be flooded with sweet memories of harvesting figs, I saw Grandad scaling the thick, strong branches of the fig tree as if seeing a tomorrow that would never come. And that it's at that moment, it's that memory, and that's when he realizes his grandfather has really gone. It's a really moving moment as well. And in many ways, some of the most moving moments are connected with that fig tree. Also at the end of the novel too. No, it's really beautiful. Now the novel is full of mysteries. It's full of people leaving mysteriously. And it's not just a device. It really is something. It's these people. They keep their stories to themselves. They don't reveal an awful lot about themselves. There are mysteries all the way through. Now it's not just about the Yugoslav wars or what happened in Bosnia. It's actually about people, why people don't share certain stories. I think you're trying to tell quite a profound psychological story here, as well as an historical story. Is that your intent as well, about what people keep closed?
Well, of course, we can always go back to Yugoslav wars, but I think what every writer is trying to do is to understand people. And of course, for me, they are mystery. It's quite difficult for me to understand how we, especially in Balkans, we talk a lot but say every now and then a little bit. How we communicate in a way that we actually don't use words when we want to say something. How we are hiding, and we are often telling more with the things we hide than with those we show. And however, all these silences actually are much more defining than everything what we say. And it's so I was trying to tell a story about us, and with us I think the people I know, the people that are close to me, but of course there aren't much different than the rest of the people in the world. So I was trying to understand the people I love the most, but of course with understanding them I'm trying to understand everyone. So yes, it was my intention, because I'm very much interested in the way people are communicating with each other. It was in the beginning. It was fun for me. I was actually laughing, and my first novel is full of jokes. I'm making fun of people in the way they are communicating, and there's also some misunderstandings in my next novel, and of course all the different stories that are made just to hide the truth, not to reveal it. And also in the fig tree, I'm dealing a lot with how people are actually trying to come close to each other, how difficult for them it is to actually bring each other together, and how even the people who love each other the most, when the difficult period comes, they have so many difficulties just speaking to each other.
That's what you get with Jadran and Anji, of course. I mean, Jadran is, she calls him, or he calls himself at some point, a man of great mysteries and self-delusions, a man of weaknesses and self-delusions. That was the phrase in English. And I mean, I think he's a really interesting young man, and he's the contemporary character, of course. He's in his 30s, and And it's through him that we see the story of Slovenia now too. I mean, he's born a Slovene because he's born into the new Republic of Slovenia. And that again is interesting because, you know, you try to get your head around, oh my goodness, was he going to be Serb, Croatian, whatever, which languages is everybody speaking? This is always the complexity of a novel from this region, is all these different identities, all these different languages. And how does one person cope with having all that inside of them?
Well, it's a process, I must say, from my own experience. It took me a while, and I think it's not much different for other people with similar experiences. Because you feel like you're belonging to a different languages, different cultures. You want all this wider space to be yours, and you want yourself to be able to cross all the borders. But then you realize that most of the people you're surrounded with they don't really understand what you want, and they don't know it's possible. They doubt that it's possible to belong like to different cultural spaces, different languages, to be like they think like it's some kind of schizophrenia. It's
when I first interviewed you about 4 or 5 years ago about Yugoslavia, my fatherland, I remember asking you at the time whether you thought this novel could have been written by a non-Yugoslav, and whether you in any way had any kind of longing for that period, that's slightly easier time, you know, in speech marks, when things were just Yugoslavia. Do you think you've moved on from that? Do you think people of your generation have moved on from that?
I think we did, yes. I think as you grow up, I think you have to close certain chapters. You have to actually answer to yourself to deal with who you are. You have to close that book. You have to be certain who you are. I think you just have to be able to answer to your kids when they ask you who you are. And I got kids in the meanwhile.
I know you do. What do you tell them then? What do you tell your kids?
Well, I tell them that I tell them now that they are Slovenians, so it's very simple for them, and they're still not interested in who I am, so I don't tell them. I tell them that grandmother and grandfather are Bosnian and that speaking Bosnian. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but it's too early for them to be able to grasp everything. Yes, but I try to make it very simple for now. But it is actually very simple because they're now in Slovenia. They speak Slovenian. They are of course Slovenian. What else should they be? And then of course some of their grandparents are speaking different languages, so they are something else. But once you have kids, you see how very simple the world can be if you just accept it for what it is, because they don't know that this is maybe not very usual. For them, this is how it is, and that's the beauty of it. And then you suddenly see the world and yourself through their eyes, and you see, yes, but this is very simple. It's just the way it is. It's nothing wrong with it. And so for me, it's not just with the kids, but this period from, I think, last 10 years, when I with also my writing, with everything, I actually made a peace with myself. I found my place in the world. I actually wrote recently an essay when I said that I even don't need a name for what I am and what is my homeland. I can live without the proper name for what I am, because I definitely know what I am and who I am and where I belong and what is mine and what's not, and I don't need even a proper name. I don't need to call that Yugoslavia or I don't know, whatever. It's just that I know for myself what is important for me and what makes me who I am.
Maybe when I interview you in a few years' time, when your next novel's been translated, we won't even need to talk about that, because that's what's interesting, I think, with each generation. It's going to be, and each new novel, it's going to be slightly different. But just before we move on, and I do want to ask you about your next novel, but the idea of ethnic and linguistic origin, now they are essential to who you are, and of course to fitting in. They're essential to this book as well. They are, I mean, it's something, however you explain it to your children, you'll never want to escape, really, because it's something to be proud of, as you say, in many ways too. And why not? Speaking several languages is a wonderful thing. You can be very proud of that. But it is essential to all your novels, this where you come from. And I think that comes back to this house in Istria. I know there's a flat in Ljubljana as well, but it is a very important central feature in the novel. Home, belonging, identity, language.
Yes, of course. I think, as you said, home, I think, is the main word. But what I've been looking to is home. I think my family, we don't have roots, or even in the place we had roots, we are being unrooted now with the course of history. My mother's family has been moving all around Europe for last, 100 years. So, but still, we have something we can call home. We know where we belong. Even though we are not ethnically the cleanest people, and we don't belong mainly ethnically to one place, but we belong to language. As I said, I'm Slovenian because Slovenian is my language, because there's no one who can say that Slovenian is more his than it's mine. I'm writing in Slovenian and I love Slovenian language, and I talk with my children in Slovenian language, so that makes me Slovenian more than anything. But beside that, I have also another language I speak, and I belong also to many other places, people, books, films, music. I always refer, when I say about, for me, geography is very emotional. I think my home is spread around where there are really these places where my memories are and where I'm emotionally connected to them. It's not like whole Yugoslavia. It's different kind of space. It's much more closer to the locations of this book, actually. The Fig Tree covers probably covers this homeland better than Yugoslavia. These are my places. This is where I belong. And
it's a very, very strong feeling reading this book, the idea of home. And in German, they call it Heimat, as you know. And I think it has that kind of essential feeling of belonging. Belonging, maybe, is the word. And I know you wrote this quite a few years ago, and so it must be sort of sometimes strange talking about a novel that's, it's just come out in English too. And that's always the challenge for an author, I think, to put themselves back into that time when they've first written it. But it's done extremely well. I know it's a very popular and, best-selling novel. It's been translated several times. It's won several awards too. And I know why, I think. And there's a passage here that I would like to read very much indeed. And this is a passage that was actually translated by your group of translators at the summer school last year. I think you know which passage it is.
Yes, I know.
It is wonderful, and it's a passage I know that Olivie Hellewell, your translator, is very proud of too, because this is what emerged from the course. And do you mind if I read it? If you've got it in Slovene, you could read it in Slovene, and I could. Have you got it with you?
Probably there somewhere here, but...
Okay, well, let me read it in English, and then we can see whether you can remember it in Slovene even. The first ruined house never leaves your mind. The first burnt out village you pass through, it's etched into your memory, and all the ruins you see afterwards fade away over time. You know they used to be there. You know you saw them, but they cannot be recalled. After a while, you don't even see the ruined houses. It's as if they were untouched or were never there at all. But the first house and the first village remain. And so I keep returning to that window on the bus to Bihać, unable to look away from the charred, gaping window frames and the bare, blackened walls, from the invisible faces moving through violently ripped open rooms, where stoves were once inevitably full of leftovers stuck to the bottom of trays, and where sideboards displayed delicate china coffee cups, patiently waiting year after year, never used because war, as it always does, arrived ahead of their special occasion. It's an amazing passage. And one of the reasons I wanted to read it, not only because it's just extraordinarily beautiful writing, is because it reminds me of the first time as a BBC journalist I came with a small group. We've got the book, how fantastic.
Yeah,
your secret helper came along and found it for you.
One of my many assistants.
It was that moment that I will never forget too, when the war in Bosnia was still raging and I was with the BBC and I saw a house like that. And it's never, ever, and I'm sure you'll never, ever forget those sights as well.
No, it's actually, this paragraph probably, it's very autobiographical, and because also for me, the first trip we made after the war, we were driving from Slovenia, and then when you come to Croatia, then you slowly coming closer and closer to Bosnia, and of course there suddenly, from out of nothing, these destroyed houses appear. And of course, later you go through many devastated areas, to completely ruined cities and villages burned down completely. But these first houses are, you don't even feel it at the moment, but later you understand that your memories of this, actually these first houses, it was still in Croatia, and there was a long way for us to go to get to my father and grandmother's place in Bosnia. And we were passing many really terrible places, but this place in Croatia, it's just stick to my memory, and so it's been actually written right from my memory.
Well, that's maybe why it's touched me so much, because it is wonderful, and I know that your students, loved it very much too, and they worked for a whole week.
Yeah,
that passage. You can tell why. Anyway, have you found the passage?
Yes, I found the passage. So.
Fantastic. Let's hear it in the original language, in Slovene.
Prve porušene hiše ne pozabiš nikoli, prva požgana vas, skozi katero se pelješ, se ti zareže v spomin. Vse ruševine, ki sledijo, s časoma zbledijo, veš, da so nekoč bile, da si jih videl, a jih ne moreš poklicati nazaj. Po določenem času porušenih hiš niti ne vidiš več, kakor bi bile cele ali pa jih ne bi bilo. A prva hiša in prva vas ostajata in zato vedno znova gledam skozi okno avtobusa, ki se pelje proti Bihaću, kakor ne bi znal odmakniti pogleda od sajastih okenskih lin, od golih zoglenelih zidov, od nevidnih obrazov, ki se premikajo skozi nasilno razprte prostore, tam, kjer so bili štedilniki, v katerih so bili vselej ostanki hrane, prilepljeni na dno tepsi, in kjer so stale kredence z lepimi keramičnimi kavnimi skodelicami, nikdar uporabljenimi, ker je vojna, kakor vedno, prehitela tisto posebno priložnost, na katero so potrpežljivo leta in leta čakale.
I know exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Anyway, that if you're going to be reading that passage from the English translation, it's on page 107, and I don't know which page it is in that, but thank you so much for that too. And I just wanted to ask you what you're working on now, to hopefully another novel.
Yes, I'm actually finishing my new novel. It will be out in Slovenia in spring, hopefully. It's again something completely different. Even from,
I expect nothing less. Of course, it's going to be completely different. Each one is so different.
I'm thinking I will return to something like the fig tree once, maybe even very soon. But now I got this idea, and it was a crazy idea. But then I said, let's do it, and it was this special time of pandemic. It has nothing to do with pandemic, but and the virus, and it started before the pandemic actually. But I said, let's do it, and look, I almost finished it. So I also have film that it's been finished from January now, but it's just waiting for some better time. So yeah, it's.
So you've got the novel, you've got films. Are you still writing columns as well?
Yes, actually, I'm more than ever, because I'm writing my Slovenian weekly column, as I do for the last 10 years, I think now. I'm also writing from Serbian weekly Vreme, and once a month. And I think since the pandemic started, I've been getting calls from all over the place to if I can write this or that. And of course I say yes, because I don't have anything else to do. I have another film project that has been postponed. There's been a theater play based on my second book, Yugoslavia, My Fatherland, which was also postponed, and because it had to be premiered in April, and it has been cancelled. And now
has it been a difficult time for you, or have you actually found it quite a productive time?
Well, it's difficult, but maybe not from professional angle as much as from personal, because my life completely changed. I used to travel around. I used to socialize a lot. I used to go to present my books to people, not computers. So yeah, it's of course, but luckily for me, I had planned this year to focus on writing, to do some kind of self-isolation, not like this, but I just have finished my film, which I've been working on last 2 years. And then I said, okay, this year I will calm down, I will write. So professionally, I was a little bit lucky. Of course, when you have kids at home, when they close the kindergarten, that made my life much, as a writer, a little bit more difficult. But still, it's much better than it could be. And I'm realizing that in a way we are lucky. But still, it's when I look now, and it's now period of half a year, and I see that my life completely changed. They invited me to go to Poland recently, and I was shocked. I was started thinking, how can I go to Poland? I have to go to airplane. And I've been on airplane for last 10, 15 years, every 2 weeks, and now suddenly I'm terrified of going to airport and to fly to Poland, where I've been last year. So it makes me actually worried how we're all adapting to this situation so much. Is like some sort of dictatorship. When you just adapt, you just lower your expectations, you just accept the situation. You realize you can go out, you realize you don't have the freedom, and you accept it. So it's been a difficult, but as I said, more from a very personal level, I think.
I think that's the way you've described it it's fascinating, and I think it'll be fascinating also to see what writing comes out of this period. As you say, your next novel is not about the pandemic, but,
no, not at all.
But there are authors who are already beginning to write about this, and I've read a lot of poetry from this time as well, and I think it's I don't think it's going to be very positive. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult, and we've got another few months, another couple of years, another few years of this. Who knows how long it's going to go on, but I do hope nonetheless that we'll be able to meet in person at some point. It is really wonderful to see you, and I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this book, The Fig Tree, and I really, really, really hope it does well. It deserves to do extremely well. So let's shout out to everyone watching. You've got to buy this book. It is called The Fig Tree. It's by Goran Vojnović. It's translated by Olivie Hellewell and it's published by Istros books. And you'll be able to buy it in all good independent bookshops. I think that's the right thing to say, isn't it?
Yes, I agree totally.
I agree. I think we're in agreement. Goran, send you big, big hugs, kisses. Congratulations on this wonderful book. And, thank you to everyone there. I know that bookshop, the Bellatrina bookshop. So I wish I were there and, wishing you very, very well and looking forward to seeing you at some point.
And we all love you and we all want to see you soon as well. So let's just hope for better times sooner than later.
Anyway, right. Thank you so much, Goran.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Look after yourself. Bye. Congratulations.
Thank you.